I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. They lived in this old bungalow-type house. It was one story, and we have stairs that immediately go up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses. We just store a lot of our old stuff in there. It's too hot and stuffy to be up there anyway. The sole window in there really didn't help much. The attic had these old creaky wooden floors that I remembered I had to polish with a coconut shell because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents are very traditional people. Anyway, my door room was right near the stairs leading up to the attic. Like, you open my door, then face right, and the stairs would be immediately right there. I hated that every time I left my room, because I would expect that something would immediately crawl down at me from the attic. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m., and their expected arrival at home would be at most 5 a.m., so a 14-year-old girl would be home alone the entire time. I told them, though, that it was fine. I would be perfectly safe here. After all, we live in a gated community. We have tons of guard dogs. Surely everything will be okay. At least, that's what I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck with cleaning the dishes and all that. As I was doing so, I could hear a bunch of neighboring dogs start barking quite a bit. I didn't really think too much of it. I mean, dogs always do that. When I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately had to lock every door and window and close off all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were open and it looked normal. My anime posters were hung all over the wall, my closet was untouched, my bed was next to my barred, tinted windows. We had to tint them because I was on the first floor, and my grandparents wanted to make sure no creeps could peep into a young girl's room. They were barred as well because my uncle who used to use the room always escaped through there to go to parties. This was my grandparents' solution to that problem. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. Until I closed off the lights. As soon as I did so, the silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a very skinny build. At first, I thought I was having hallucinations. So I turned on the lights again. He was gone. I closed them again. There he was once more. Opened, gone. Closed. This time, he was gone then, too. I sighed in relief. I guess I was just tricking myself. Or maybe something else had been casting a shadow. I double-locked my door just to be safe. One with the doorknob lock and one of those door latch-type locks. Then I tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep, though, when so many dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, they were our neighbors. Finally, though, I was just starting to fall asleep when I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought. Surely I'm tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow tight. It must be just rats, I told myself. Those rats seemed awfully heavy, though, and it sounded like they were pushing furniture around as well. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly rush down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with my blanket and waited for something. I was also wishing that my parents had given me a phone at a time like this, but all I could do was wait with bated breath. Suddenly, I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled with. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. When they noticed this, they tried to push it. This time, I had finally stood up, shaking. I was just a kid, home alone with no phone and no means of defense. All that was between me and this intruder was this thick door from very old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door and made sure everything was locked tight. I didn't want to make a single sound. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want him to know I was there. I don't know why he stopped, but he just did. I didn't go back to my bed, though. I sat there by that door, waiting. It felt like forever before I finally heard the footsteps returning up the stairs, but still I sat there. After a while, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think was thank God those windows were barred. I can't even remember what happened after that. I think I fell asleep or something, or maybe I was too scared to even think. I just remember the next day when my family and I were having breakfast. I casually brought it up. "Grandpa, I think I heard footsteps up in the attic last night." My grandmother scoffed at me. It was probably just rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want them to worry. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs that were near my room were the neighbors. Also, there was nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow that looked exactly like a man. And when I checked later, I noticed that the attic window was open. This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night. I'm astounded that I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm at my friend's apartment, who lived in a really rough part of town. In a series of somewhat poor decisions, that night I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know. Safe to say, after a solid night of partying around 4 a.m., I was not exactly in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decided that instead of staying the night at my friend's apartment like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own place. My friend's apartment had 2 separate entrances and exits to the building, one in the back, unlit parking lot of the building, and one facing the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive on the street, and the door in the front of the building locks itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realize I must have looked like the easiest target on the entire planet. I'm a small, petite female in my early 20s, and I can hardly stay upright at that moment. I was using a street lamp to prop myself up, and not doing all that good a job at it either. It was basically a beacon for any nearby predators saying, "Come get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact there was literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came through. Not very good. I remember vaguely checking to see what car I was getting picked up in, and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon after stepping outside, a black sedan pulled up to the curb and started rolling down the window. I stepped forward, but before this man even spoke, I could still feel something was wrong. He had this expression like he was tearing me apart with his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a whole new meaning to the word predator being used to describe a criminal, because I knew in that moment what it felt like to be the prey. He basically barked at me, "I'm your Uber driver." This was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, an Uber driver would just roll down the window and say, "Is this your name?" or any version of that, always including your actual name. I think I just stared at him for a moment, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in. So I asked him, "What does it say my name is?" He immediately got enraged and started screaming about how he doesn't have time for this and to just get in the fucking car. I don't think I'd ever sobered up so fast in my life. Now I was completely panicking. Obviously, this guy was not my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately saw it was not a match. Meanwhile, this guy was still screaming at me, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, the guy could easily outrun me or have a weapon on him. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab some random girl off the street, he must be packing some weapon of some sort. I can't exactly run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you and I didn't have the keys nor the time to unlock it. Running toward the back door would do nothing as well, as he was idling right by the mouth of the driveway toward the back parking lot, and again I would have to take the time to find the right keys and get in. If I screamed, well, it's not exactly the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante. I could hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment still. I knew they wouldn't be able to hear me. It was also 4 a.m., and absolutely no one was around. People talk a lot about how they either sprint into action or freeze up, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt like if I did, it would be the immediate end of me. If I kept standing there, though, staring in shock at this screaming man, well, obviously the result would be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds passed by. Just as he was looking ready to get out of the car and confront me, another black sedan pulled up right behind him. Checking the license plate as quickly as I could, I realized this was my actual Uber driver and made a full sprint to the car. I threw myself in, screaming at my Uber driver, "What's my name?" The poor dude looked terrified but responded very quickly, to which I replied, "Get me the fuck out of here. That man is trying to kidnap me." If I was in this Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to even react. But luckily, my dude flew out of there and offered to call the cops for me as well, which I declined and now regret. He then walked me to the front door of my apartment, ensuring I got inside safely. Truly, what an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fattest tip my college bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. This happened a few years ago when I was bartending in college. I was coming home down a stretch of divided highway at around 3 a.m. when I noticed a car heading towards me in the wrong lane. I doubted myself at first and thought the car must be on the other side of the highway. Sure enough though, a white Ford sedan passed me at an extremely high speed, at least 90 miles per hour. It's worth noting for later that I also drive a white Ford sedan. I was used to drunken idiot drivers in the middle of the night, so I pulled over to the side of the road and let him pass me by. I had a moment of clarity and thought to call the police, thinking this person could either hurt themselves or somebody else. The dispatcher answered, and after telling them which road and exit/mile marker I was at, they told me they would send a car out. The state police station, it turned out, was only a few exits away, so I figured they would send somebody and I would just drive on home. As I headed back onto the highway, I noticed some lights a few miles behind me. I live in a more rural part of southeastern Pennsylvania, and traffic at 3 a.m. tends to be truckers and cops. The car gained on me as I was getting up to speed, so I stayed in the right lane and waited to be passed by. Instead, they flipped on their high beams, making it uncomfortable to drive, and rode right on my tailgate. At this point, I thought I was going to be pulled over by the police. I drove a white Ford sedan, and had just called about a different white Ford sedan, so I grabbed my registration from my glove box. Suddenly, the car behind me audibly slammed on the brakes and stopped right in the middle of the highway. They must have shut off their car, because the lights went out as well, and I saw what looked like the same Ford sedan from earlier. Still, I thought this may have been a police car. They had a roof rack, and it could have looked like I had reached for my gun in my glove box or something. I panicked and called 911 for the second time and asked the dispatcher if they had already sent a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher was a little bit curt with me and assured me that they had sent somebody out. "We have sent out a trooper to find the car, sir." "Sorry, I only asked because somebody's following me and acting a bit weird. It could be a cop, and I think I freaked him out by getting my registration." "Are you pulled over, sir?" "No, they didn't turn on their lights. Let me try to get the trooper we sent out on the line." As she was talking, the car again sped toward me and stopped inches from my bumper. Again, their high beams were on, and again they slammed on the brakes. I told the dispatcher, "I'm pretty sure this is not the police behind me." The car sped up to my bumper again and turned their high beams on, this time slamming on the horn. Hearing this, the dispatcher asked me what was happening. "What's going on? Did you honk?" "That's the car behind me. I don't think it's a cop." "I'll try to get the trooper again, but I don't think that's him behind you." For some reason, this is what shook me. Before that, I was thinking I would get pulled over and maybe get a ticket. Up until then, I was going the speed limit and trying to avoid getting pulled over. I told the dispatcher, "I don't care if I get pulled over, I'm speeding away, and if they put their lights on, then I'll pull over." I started to accelerate, but the person behind me just kept pace with me. The speed limit was 55, and they kept on my bumper the entire time. Then they started swerving back and forth. I tried to signal for an exit, then bail on it, but they followed me very precisely. At the next exit after that, I took the off-ramp and continued onto the on-ramp, and the car followed behind me the whole time. I thought about trying to get to Wawa, a convenience store/gas station that's pretty much the only populated place in southeastern Pennsylvania at a 3 a.m., but the dispatcher and I thought that would be unsafe. She was very calm all this time and talking to another person trying to send the police to me. The other person, maybe a supervisor, asked if I could drive to the state police station. Realizing that I was only one exit away, I told her I was coming there. She said that she would have troopers meet me outside. As I pulled off the exit to the station, the car followed me. I blew a few red lights trying to reach it, and the car tried to pull into the other lane to pass me or pull up alongside me. Once the police station was in view, I put on my turn signal, and the car slammed on its brakes again, turned off their lights, and turned into a parking lot. The story ends kind of anticlimactically, as I pulled into the police station and met up with the troopers. 2 of them went to find the car, and I stayed with a 3rd. I thanked the dispatcher and her supervisor, and the state trooper escorted me home after taking a statement from me. I was never called to follow up or testify though, so I can only assume the person was never caught. Sharing this experience from literally last night because A, it's creepy as hell, at least for me, and B, I want people to learn from my experience. This is a precautionary tale. I understand that this was my fault, but maybe if I can help one person by telling my story, it's worth it. As a general rule, I don't drink very much, but once a month or so, I'll go out with my friends and binge a bit. My friends and I had a great night at a bar in the city, and they all left. I was chatting up a cute guy, so I decided to stay behind. I went back to his place. Post-coitus, very unsatisfying for anyone interested. I was ready to head home, so I called an Uber to pick me up. I didn't know where I was. I knew the city I was in, but not exactly my exact location. I order the Uber, but it's taking forever. You know, requesting, so I cancel it and try again. Pretty soon, a car pulls up alongside me. I drunkenly mumble something like, "Is this the Uber?" I hop in. Mistake. Apparently, Ubers are supposed to have some kind of marking on the vehicle. This guy pulls away and starts driving. We're chatting, I'm fumbling for a cigarette, and the next thing I notice is that we're headed on the highway, but the opposite direction of where we needed to drive, and we're going a solid 90 miles per hour. Then I get a call from my Uber driver. He's there and I'm not, because I'm in the car with a fucking nutcase. I start texting my friend frantically, counting off mile markers for her. I realize it's going to do jack, because she's probably really drunk too. I call 911. But I realized this guy was crazy. He was refusing to let me out of the vehicle, so I had to do it on the sly. It had been 40 minutes now. I was terrified. I don't know where I am. I don't know who this guy is. We're driving well over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. This guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone call. Yo, get off the phone. Who the fuck are you calling? You better not be a snitch. He was also smoking pot, so I didn't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. I started chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if they were my friend, praying that they would catch on. Hey girl, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past the highway exit. No, sweetie, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. It's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends. Thanks, sweet baby Jesus, the operator caught on. He got me to stay on the phone while he sent out the cops, and we developed a sort of code. If I saw the cops, I was supposed to casually hang my hand out the window, which looked normal because I was smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex, and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile at the moment. I relay this to the operator, in code. Pretty soon, I could see the lights from the cop cars, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point, I didn't care if he was onto me or not. I didn't know if he had a weapon, so I slumped down in my seat just in case things got hot. The cops surrounded us, got him out of the car, and then once it's safe, they extricated me as well. They whisked me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all this to the officer, I find out that the guy they caught's 40-ish years on this earth. He's been in federal prison for almost 30 of them, all for violent offenses. I want people to learn from my mistakes. If nothing else, call 911 and stay on the line. So this happened over the span of around a year when I was 15 to 16. I'm 20 now, and it's only recently been revealed to me just how fucked up this situation really was. I was obviously still living at home at the time, but my sister, who's 7 years older than me, had already moved out and was living with her now husband. Their high school best friend and some other dude they met via one of those find a roommate sites were there as well. He was kinda the reclusive, nerdy type, much preferring to hide in his room watching Star Trek and playing computer games than actually hang out with the roommates. The only person he ever really seemed to want to be around was his similarly shy and nerdy girlfriend. For a little context to the story, at the time this happened, he was 28 and she was 24. They were both a little bit weird, but initially they seemed entirely harmless. For the ease of telling the story and saving on characters, friendly roommate will be FR, weird roommate will be WR, and his weird girlfriend will be WGF. Now, my sister and I never really had the best relationship with our parents, and at this point things were especially rocky. Our mother was dating a guy at the time who, to put it kindly, was an abusive sack of shit, who seemingly loathed me for no reason, and would find any excuse to go off at me. As a result, I spent a lot of time staying over at my sister's place. It was around this time when I'd started to spend a lot of time there that WR and WGF started to get really strange. As I said earlier, the pair of them had always been kind of odd. They only ever really seemed to want to speak with each other, and would even go so far as to ignore anyone else who spoke to them. WGF was worse than WR for this by a country mile. He would at least give you some monosyllabic responses most of the time. She, on the other hand, just had this kind of creepy habit of blankly staring at you for seconds, then walking away if you asked her a question or tried to engage in conversation at all. That wasn't the especially weird behavior, though. When I would stay over, I'd sleep on a futon in FR's office space, which was on the ground floor. It happened to be next to the downstairs bathroom, which for some reason WGF vastly preferred to the upstairs one. She would take long showers in the middle of the night, which, whatever. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper and she wasn't a shower singer or anything like that, so I generally slept right through them. One night, however, I had stayed up mega late doing revision and homework and happened to be awake after she finished her shower. I was too absorbed in my task to really pay attention to anything else, but I definitely noted hearing the shower shut off because that was my indicator of how goddamn late it really was. Approximately 10 minutes later, I look up from my laptop, and there she is. I always kept the door open just a crack, because the room tended to get unbearably hot if I didn't. She was just standing there, outside my room butt-ass naked, watching me through the open crack in the door. I called her name and asked if she was okay, which seemingly startled her, because she walked away pretty sharply. I convinced myself that in my over-caffeinated, sleep-deprived state, I must have imagined the entire thing, and I didn't mention it to anyone. Fast forward around a month. I head over to my sister's one night to find FR kind of agitated about what he perceives to be a peeping Tom problem. He'd found fingerprints on the outside of his office window in such a way that would imply someone had been pressing up against the glass and looking in. The blind in his room was slightly too small for the window, so you could see in from the outside if you looked through at the sides. The room was on the front of the house as well, and the window was easily accessible from the street. He'd become concerned that some random passing pervert had been spying on him while having private moments, so to speak, in his office, or maybe a potential burglar had been sizing up the joint. The police were called, but as they didn't have any external CCTV at this point, no evidence could really be provided, and ultimately not a whole lot could be done. To combat this escalating further, though, FR installed both internal and external CCTV on the house. This was all installed while WR and WGF were away on a holiday, and I guess everyone just kind of forgot to tell them about it. Another couple of months later, I go to my sister's to find WR's room empty, and I was informed that he had moved out. Of course, I asked why, and I was informed simply that he and WGF were a pair of fucking creeps, and the others had collectively decided to give them the boot. Apparently, her watching me through that office door was not a one-time incident. The CCTV footage showed that she regularly made a habit of standing and watching me through that cracked door, sometimes for as long as 20 to 30 minutes. I was usually asleep when she did it, so I never noticed. Not only that, but the fingerprints on the window had apparently been from WR standing outside and watching me after I'd showered and was hanging out in just a towel. This was a less regular occurrence, but apparently it was caught on camera enough times for it to be very concerning. As if that wasn't weird enough in and of itself, I was recently hanging out with my sister and her husband, and he passed this comment about how he wishes they'd told me the full story at the time, so I could have chosen to press charges. I asked what he meant by that. He revealed that not only had they both been secretly watching me, the CCTV also showed they'd messed with food and things that I bought, including clips of them licking all my apples, first spitting in my orange juice, even dumping regular cow's milk into my lactose-free stuff. That explained why I'd had a period of feeling really sick out of nowhere. To top it off, apparently when FR barged into their room to confront them about it, he not only found several shirts I thought I'd misplaced elsewhere, had been stolen by the two of them and literally hung on their wall like a shrine. She had done several drawings of me sleeping and written a poem called Ode to My Name, whose contents I don't know, and never really want to find out. Apparently FR gave them an ultimatum. You have 2 hours to get the fuck out of this house and never contact any of us ever again, or I'm calling the police. Obviously, they took the former option. They never tried to contact me subsequent to this, but I feel sick thinking of what they were potentially planning for me. I work at a large crafting store in California, and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's been going on is needed. So last year, we hired this guy I'll name Hayden. Hayden was a little bit quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative over the next couple of weeks, and actually started to never stop talking. He would constantly say this really weird shit. For instance, one day he was put in charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having much difficulty assembling the table he was working on, and said something about slashing his wrists if he couldn't figure out how to put it together. Another time, we were both working in the stock room, and he kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz. I have to admit, he did in fact look like him. It was kind of creepy. I remember one day I had just gotten off work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up, when out of nowhere Hayden walked up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face. I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing much, just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going to that Taco Bell across the parking lot and shanking someone." He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after saying that. As my wife picked me up, we saw him walking toward the Taco Bell, and he flashed us this creepy-ass ear-to-ear smile. The last straw for me, though, was when he and I were assigned to work our first spring freight and get it loaded up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11 and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden just would not stop goofing around. He also seemed to work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at a time. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us we would both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was quite pissed off at this point, and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized profusely, but then he said something that really concerned me. He turned to me in the most serious tone I had ever heard him speak in since meeting him. "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to tell me that he knew where all the emergency exits are and would first shoot all the cashiers, then move the other employees in the store. I'll admit that I didn't immediately report what he said, but it did have me quite on edge. I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside and revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what was said, but Hayden apparently admitted that he said what he said and kept asking if I had been the one who reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store and still am. I was heading to the break room for my final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to the paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew. He said it was just a lucky guess, which I obviously thought was BS, mostly because his tone of voice was very sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he kept staring at me with this huge smirk on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name of a popular TV show character. What year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name. At this point, I had started to walk away, as I had other things to do. The whole time I was walking away, he was still trying to talk to me. I could hear him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that same day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy who was buying the paint, and I told her I did not. She told me he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, like if I'm a good worker, if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he's come into the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked for me specifically. I don't know for sure, but I suspect this guy might be Hayden's cousin, as they sort of look alike and have very similar mannerisms. Both vaguely resemble the Parkland shooter and have that same creepy vibe as well. It might not be the scariest thing on here, but it is still freaky. Update. Tonight I worked the closing shift and was outside getting carts after the store closed at 8 p.m. when two SUVs pulled into the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store, and the other one parked in the main parking lot. I was standing in the front of the entrance doors when a man dressed in all black and wearing a hood stepped out of one of the SUVs. Another guy walked up next to him, and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them we were closed. I looked down to notice a large bat in the hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to be let back inside, and these two guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot, staring right at me. My manager let me in and called the police. The guys were of course long gone when they got there. This could have easily been a totally unrelated incident, but I thought I'd still update, because the whole thing makes me think it could be you-know-who. This happened around 2006, when I was in my mid-20s. My sister, the unfortunate main character in this story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiancé and I. On weekends, we went out to one of the two bars that had karaoke, air hockey, and the like. This particular night, we were at the bar further out from where we lived in the city, a good half an hour by car. Everyone was having drinks, socializing with people we knew. It was one of those places with lots of regulars. Singing karaoke? Nothing out of the ordinary, really. Except that night, my sister started hanging out with these two older ladies who had a liquor store in their purses and were quite willing to share. Although I did not know this at the time, she tended to drink a lot more than me, so that was a big score for her. Less money spent on drinks after all. But she ended up far more hammered than usual. Towards the end of the night, around 1:45, she was really extremely drunk. The aforementioned fiancé, my sister's boyfriend, and I were all in a heated air hockey game, planning to leave as soon as it was over. She walked up to us and said she was going to smoke a cigarette outside. Nothing unusual, everyone typically did this, until we were done. About 5 minutes later, we paid our tab and walked out, but she was not in the porch area where the smokers congregated. Okay, weird, but not totally alarming. We went out back of the bar to check for her. Inside, in the restroom, throughout the large parking lot. It's notable that this particular bar was in a business park, so there were multiple businesses that were closed, as well as the Mexican restaurant next door that had just closed as well. We searched and asked everyone that knew us, and even those who didn't if they had seen her, but somehow nobody had. I asked the workers from the restaurant that were sitting outside as well. They seemed nervous when telling me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't think on that much until later. By then, I was in a full-on panic attack after trying to call her cell about 15 times, only to have it immediately go to voicemail. Being a bit inebriated myself, I started searching for her. Went as far as to take off my heels and start running down the highway, searching for her there. Honestly, there had been times she would start walking home in the past, though never from this place, as it was way far away from where we lived. The fiancé and her boyfriend thought we should go to the house to see if she'd gotten someone to bring her home. Seemed unlikely, but not unheard of. We get home though, and she's nowhere to be found. Just as we were about to head back, and I was going to phone the police, I received a call from the PD on my phone. They indicated to me that they had my sister, and there had been an incident. I needed to get down there right away. We rushed to the PD where we were taken into a room with my sister. Her face was red from obvious crying, and bruises were starting to show on her arms and chest. She said that when she told us she was going outside, she thought we said we were leaving then, so she walked over to the car. After a few minutes being drunk and tired, she sat down up against it to wait. A van pulled up, and a young man started asking her directions to somewhere. She walked closer to try and explain, when suddenly the back door flew open, and 2 other men grabbed her and threw her in, taking off. They were very rough with her, hitting her a few times while holding her down, saying they only wanted money. They snatched her purse from her, breaking the straps, and searched it, quite haphazardly, as they didn't find the $30 she had in it. After driving around a bit speaking in Spanish she couldn't understand, they pulled out a gun, making sure she saw it, and put a bandana around her eyes, telling her they were going to let her go. She was driven to some woods by a neighborhood she did not know. The door was opened, and they pushed her out, telling her to run, and that if she took off the blindfold or turned around, they'd shoot her. She ran and ran. Eventually, she did take the blindfold off and came to the first door she saw, beating on it and screaming for help. The police were called, she was picked up, and now we're back to my being there, hearing what I'd feared all along had happened. Report filed. Police did a search and did locate the bandana she'd ripped off, but as she was so intoxicated and terrified, she was not able to give a clear description of the van, other than white older model, or the 3 occupants other than young Hispanic men. The investigation turned up nothing as no cameras caught any of this event. Hell, we even had detectives in our home who said, "Look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and didn't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges on you." Aside from the bruises, broken purse, and her trauma, there was nothing concrete to go on. That was most unpleasant. I'm still fairly convinced someone at the restaurant knew something, given their suspicious behaviors when I asked about her, but the police were never able to find that link. All said and done, the guys were never found. Eventually, we just moved on in different states. It's now just a story in our lives. It still makes me sick thinking of what could have happened, but thankfully it did not. Be safe out there, kids. This takes place in October 1977. When my mom was 16, she ran away from her abusive home along with her friend Lisa. They hitchhiked from Mass all the way to California. Obviously, this wasn't the brightest of plans, but given my mom's tumultuous home life and past experiences, she didn't see how it could be much more dangerous than anything she'd already experienced. They had a pretty safe and uneventful trip across the country, finding friends and many truck drivers and other travelers. It wasn't until they'd finally reached California when this encounter happened. The hillside strangler, at first thought to be just one assailant, ended up being 2 men who were caught and brought to justice for 10 different murders. Anyway, to continue on with the story, my mom and Lisa ended up meeting these 2 guys who were super nice to them. They crashed at their place for a few days partying, but nothing bad had come of it at this point. These guys tell the girls that they're going to take them to the Hollywood Hills and Sunset Boulevard to see all the sights. Not being from the area, my mom had no idea that these areas were more crime-ridden at that time, especially considering they were supposed to be sightseeing. My mom really wanted to see where all the movie stars got to live. These guys take my mom and her friend to some divey restaurant/bar and get them both super drunk. It was also the first time my mom was introduced to and tried cocaine. After these underage girls were now completely high and drunk, they split off into pairs, and my mom's friend disappeared with one of these guys. My mom was now hanging out one-on-one with one of her new guy friends. He then suggests that they stand on the sidewalk of Sunset Boulevard in the middle of the night, and if or when a car pulls up, she should get in and direct the driver to drive across the street to this dark parking lot. It wasn't really until the first and only car pulled up and she got in that she realized this guy was prostituting her out. Keep in mind, these guys have been nothing but kind and respectful to my young mom and friend for the past few days. Also, very sadly, this type of abuse was not a new concept for her either. She got into this car, and instead of pulling into the parking lot, he kept driving straight. My mom explained that he'd gone the wrong way. Now he started to drive faster. My mom moved toward the door, but he locked it, hit her, and attempted to hold her down all at the same time. He told her she wasn't going anywhere. My mom knew in her head she needed to get out of that car or she'd be dead, so in one swift move, she unlocked the door, tucked, and rolled out of the car. His car came to an immediate screeching halt. Thankfully, she saw some bushes in front of a house, so she ran to hide behind them. He turned around, searching for her, creeping slowly along. His passenger side was facing where she was hiding, and she was peeking through the bushes. She saw he had a gun. As soon as his car crept by, she ran to the backyard. It was all fenced in. There was no other way out, so she had to go back the way she came. By the time she'd crawled back into the bushes to see if he was still around, she saw his car had gone to the end of the road and turned back around. He passed by again. When she thought he was far enough away, she crawled out of the bushes to start running. But then she saw his brake lights. Confident he'd now seen her, she ran as fast as possible around a corner. She could hear his car gaining, so she had to duck and hide behind parked cars on the road. As soon as he passed by again, she booked it across the street, which took her through the parking lot she was originally supposed to be in, and back to her friend. The creep did circle back again, but by then she was with her friend and they were leaving the area. My mom and her friend quickly ditched these two assholes and did find a safer place to stay. Only a short time later did my mom call home and eventually make it home safely. It wasn't until a long time later that she saw on the news a story about woman being murdered. She recognized the murderer, dubbed the Hillside Strangler, as the man who had picked her up that night. It was Kenneth Bianchi who drove his car that night. My mom said there's no questioning it was his distinguishing features and definitely his mustache. When I was in junior high school, I was quite an odd kid. I liked having colorful hair, piercings, and all that kind of stuff. And the school I went to was near Atlanta, so there weren't very many people like me. I tried to find friends that liked the same kind of music and other interests, and I could normally kind of brush off any weird energy that people put off and ignore it. I just wanted some friends. Anyway, I was in gym one day hanging out with a group of weirdos, and there was this guy that I hadn't ever seen before. He was wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt and jeans that were a size too small. His name was Ernest. We immediately clicked with each other, in a platonic way, because we laughed at a lot of the same things. We started hanging out in gym together every day, people watching and making fun of people playing basketball. It wasn't too long though until he started making fun of my appearance and making me feel absolutely terrible about myself. I had super bad acne in high school, and he liked to joke about saying I had meth skin. First strike. Me being me though, I kept hanging out with him, and eventually it led to hanging out after school as well. He would invite me over to his house, and we would only stay in his room. He refused to let me meet his family. His parents didn't really speak English very well, I guess, but I still wanted to meet them. I always thought it was weird that Ernest didn't know any Spanish, but his siblings did, and when he could speak words, it sounded Russian. He pretty much only ever watched It Was Always Sunny in Philadelphia on TV, and rambled about superheroes. He would always come up with these strange scenarios where he was an evil villain, and how much power he could have. Fast forward, and I get a job at a pizza place. Ernest gets the same job at this exact pizza place as well, so inevitably we're always together. Always. He pretty much never let me out of his grasp. It got to a point where he took me to school every day in his PT Cruiser, which still makes me get chills every time I see one of those damn shoe-shaped ass cars. We started skipping school a lot. I mean, we pretty much only went to school about 2 or 3 times a week. This is where things started to suck real bad. He started pressuring me to do sexual things with him. I don't really want to get into details because it's pretty disturbing, but he manipulated the situation in such a way that I felt like we were in a relationship because I thought I needed him. He really convinced me that we were a couple, but I was so repulsed by him that I could never fully accept that. He started to tell our other friends that he'd had sex with me and that we were in a relationship. I denied it all. To this day, I still deny it. I've lied to therapists, I've lied to my friends, but right now I am admitting to all of that. At one point, he even ended up living with me and my family in the same room as me. He convinced my entire family that he was gay, just so he could live with me. He literally dressed up in pink and put a scarf around his neck and pranced around my aunt trying to win her over with this fake personality. I was so used to living in this chaos, though, that this was barely a problem for me. During all of this, he was such a rude piece of shit to me as well, of course. I remember asking him for a ride one day and he just said no, for no good reason, even though I really needed it. I started to get real pissed off because he would never actually give me a reason, just keep smirking at me. He did this type of thing very frequently. We were sitting in the living room once and he silently got up and drove off somewhere, came back, walked to the living room doorway, stared at me for 15 seconds and walked into my room. I could hear a bunch of rustling, so I stormed in there thinking he was up to something sketchy. He had completely dressed into his sleep pants with his hands in his pocket, and he just wouldn't take his hand out. At this point, I was a bit scared. I forced my hand inside and pulled out a knife. I don't remember how the night or days continued after that. Fast forward again, and I'm at my best friend Kayla's birthday party, and everyone is camping in the backyard. Ernest hated Kayla because she was a way out for me in his perspective. She got in the way of us. I'm sweating typing this out because this is probably one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. The sequence of events itself is a bit blurry, but I still remember it. I had made it very clear to Ernest at this point in time that we were not a thing, and he needed to let go of that fantasy. I had a crush on this boy named John, and we slept in the same tent together. Morning comes, and I can hear Ernest outside, asking people if they knew where I was. Someone said, "She's in the tent with John." I was scared immediately. I knew something horrible was about to happen. The tent rips open. I don't have a shirt on. He begins screaming as loud as he can, cussing all of us out, just pitching an absolute fit and storms off. He goes to his car and calls me, and tells me to get in now. Everyone there was pretty freaked out. Kayla begged me not to go to the car because she knew how scary Ernest was as a person. I didn't want anyone else to be uncomfortable though, so I figured if I went, it would ease everyone else just a little bit that he wasn't there. I went. As soon as the car door closed, we sped off. Fast. Really fast. I looked over at him wide-eyed. He was scream-crying with absolutely no expression on his face, tears streaming but emotionless. He just keeps whispering, "You were supposed to love me," over and over and over again. He starts speeding faster. If I can't love you, then no one else can. I'm actively having a straight panic attack in the passenger seat. I can't hear because my ears are ringing, and I can't see a thing either. Meanwhile, Kayla had already called my mom, and somehow my mom had left the house fast enough to track us down in that PT Cruiser. He parked at a church. My mom was watching us. Ernest had a box cutter at his side. I got a call from my mom. I can't really remember what she said, but I know it was something along the lines of, "I'm gonna slit your fucking throat," to Ernest. He started coming to his senses, if you can even call it that. He dropped me back off at Kayla's and told me he was going to kill himself immediately after. Kayla and I were frantically trying to call his parents about a possible imminent suicide. However, they couldn't speak English. He called the police on himself because he thought he was going to harm himself or someone else. He was gone for a couple of weeks, and when he came back, he was parked outside my school waiting for me to come out. He ran right up to me. I noticed he had on a plaid button-up shirt and it was tucked into his pants, which was extremely odd to me. I knew immediately that this was another one of his fake personalities. He was speaking differently as well, very proper almost, like just a few weeks had turned him into a saint. It wasn't long after that I admitted myself into a mental institution because I couldn't stop breaking down. Everyone in the groups told me to get rid of him, and I had not realized how serious this was until I saw everyone's reactions to my stories. There were so many incidents with this psycho that I can't even type it all out. I did get rid of him. I found new friends, and without them I don't know how this would have gone. I haven't seen or spoken to him in about 3 years, and thankfully I don't think we'll ever meet again. This happened a few years ago, when I was around 20 or so. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt at my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes. He mentioned that he had this close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother. She now lived across the street from me, and he thought it would be a swell idea if we met, because apparently we're very similar. I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life. He rings her cell and tells her to come by my place. She arrived at my apartment and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, so 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason. We played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided this was a good chance to go home and leave us two alone. We chilled for a while longer, ended up making out, and I got all of her contact info before she told me she was going home and we would meet up again soon. Over the next few weeks, we developed quite a strong relationship, and we hung out almost daily. I would just throw on some pajamas and walk across the street, and we get wasted together and watch movies. It was awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, though, things got real weird. The day I returned, she asked if she could come over, so I unpacked all my shit in a hurry and told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all of the awesome things I did and people I met in New York City, but I could immediately tell she didn't want to hear a single word of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she just said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a fuck." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily I had been getting to know was not like this. She was a caring, passionate, and amazing person. Or so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later. I had just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift. I collapse in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It was about 9 p.m. when I get a text from Emily. "Hey, what's up?" I didn't feel much like replying at the moment. I was too exhausted, and our last hangout was too weird for me to comprehend. I was still trying to decide how to deal with everything. I plugged in my phone to charge, turned the lights off, and fell asleep almost effortlessly. All of a sudden, though, I wake up to someone slamming on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs. "Open the fucking door! Let me in, now!" My entire apartment reeked of cigarette smoke. I grabbed my phone from beside my bed. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles per hour. 27 missed phone calls. A bunch of text messages, all from Emily. I scan through the texts while she's at my door screaming, trying to break it down now. I see the most recent text from her is a long one, claiming I'm a piece of shit for not responding earlier, and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. She had a key to the building still, from when she used to live there. I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack. I try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door and try to calm her down? Should I call the police? Is it possible to just ignore her? I decide to open the door. She begins wildly wailing on me, swinging her arms trying to hit me. She was smoking a cigarette, and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was also obviously on some sort of drug. She kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow thankfully able to calm her down without much more violence. I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice little enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another. She was quiet now, finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole, and I needed to explain myself right now. As I looked into her eyes, I could see pure evil as she spoke to me in an eerily calm demeanor. In that very moment, I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I took her home and returned to my apartment to attempt sleeping, at which I was not able to succeed. A couple days later, I return home from work, and there's an envelope tape at my door. I open it, and it's a handwritten letter from Emily, apologizing and saying I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a candy bar attached to the envelope, one that I'd never heard of, that she had always told me I needed to try. I never spoke to her again after. From what Matt tells me, which by the way he always knew she was a problematic person, she's a heavy user of crack now, and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold this large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting my extended family, but she got along quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking a vast assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had become quite inebriated by the time we had to leave. Therefore, I would be the one driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forests, and parts of it are unlit. Nothing to fear though. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just 2 young lovers making the most of our moments together. There's a portion of the highway that descends down this enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and go uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost slammed into whatever it was. I smashed the brakes. I turned to my girlfriend and asked her if she just saw that. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote. They were a fairly common sight in the area, but something just felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of the car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars. Not like that, anyway. For some reason, I decide to check it out. I turn my car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest into which this thing had vanished. I step out of the car and walk toward the woods. I don't see anything, but now it feels like perhaps I've just made a grave error. My heart is pounding. and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention, but I can't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep 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 that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. It was a long and blaring honk. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she had suddenly leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely, this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved, before turning around and walking slowly back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he had initially vanished in, he'd circled back around and come from another spot in the forest beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was slowly walking toward me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody. Or maybe they did and just didn't think to tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for who knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, thankfully. But I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially down near Deep Creek. A bit of a preface here. I was around 10 to 11 years old when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognize some red flags. I attended camp over the summer, the typical 8 to 3 routine. My house sits close to the end of my street, which forms a U, but for some reason the bus driver would never drop me off at my actual house. Instead, I would always get dropped off right at the end of my street, where I would toddle myself along back home. Both my parents worked late hours, sometimes not getting home until 8 p.m. It would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting in 6th grade when the bus dropped me off at home, I would be all by myself. I'd do the usual middle school routine, play games online and watch a lot of TV. Occasionally, my neighbor's cat would come into my backyard, and I would feed and pet her as a way to get outside. The only computer in the house was in my dad's workroom, which has a window overlooking the desk, and a window overlooking the side of the house as well. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and kitchen of my house, and since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. Most days when I got home, I'd toss off my backpack and go right to that room. You could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from outside. Unfortunately, this would lead to something that I had nearly forgotten about up until now. That day, I got off the bus and I did as expected. Went to my dad's workroom and got started playing computer games right away. About 30 minutes into this though, I could hear a faint meowing coming from outside the window. I paused the game and looked outside, thinking maybe my neighbor's cat had wandered over once again. Nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again not long after. It was quiet but still very noticeable, so I checked the other window as well. Still nothing. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes or so. Eventually, I got frustrated and went to the living room to watch TV. Not even 2 minutes later, meowing from the window I was sitting right beside. Now I was starting to get confused as well as a bit creeped out, so I shut the blinds tight and kept trying to watch TV. The meows continued, but only when they came from the window right behind me did I jump up and flee the living room, officially skeeved. I went into my bedroom, where the blinds were down but still cracked open for some sunlight. I started to read a book, only to hear the meow coming from outside my bedroom window. This was enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt, but I couldn't see it to be sure. He said he would have the neighbor come check it out and call me back 10 minutes later. 10 minutes go by, and I get a call from my dad saying he was coming home early from work. Nothing urgent in his voice, just that his job had gotten canceled at the last minute, and now he could come home early. I really didn't think anything of it. Only when he got home did I finally realize the cat noises had suddenly stopped. Fast forward to the present, and I asked my dad about that strange incident, thinking it was so funny that the cat had followed me around all night. What he told me next made my blood run cold. After I called him, my neighbor did indeed come to check on the house. What he found were large footprints, leading in circles all around our home, clustered close to the walls, so that even if I looked outside, I wouldn't have seen anything. Someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was through the windows, and making cat noises to try and get me to come outside. They must have known I was home alone, since it was easy to see me walk by myself down the street and let myself in. My neighbor had immediately called my dad and searched the property as well, but he didn't find anyone. The police weren't called in the end, since there was no evidence but footprints that led off into the woods and eventually got lost. I never saw anyone either. My dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me to know that there are people who would use these tactics to try and lure kids out of their homes, and from there, do whatever they wanted with them. I'm currently a uni student, and on Tuesday nights I come home pretty late. Not late enough that my parents would call the police or anything, but definitely missing the regular bus times. Anyway, as luck would have it, I managed to catch the very last bus one Tuesday night after getting to the station. Typically, it's nothing to be worried about. If you keep to yourself and stick to safe-looking people, other uni students, mothers, the bus driver, you'll be alright. Growing up in a dangerous country and migrating to a much safer one still hasn't rid me of those instincts. That night, I got all these bad vibes and was feeling a weird buzz. Something was off that evening, but I couldn't quite tell what it was. We get to the main stop, the shopping center, and I find out that the bus has terminated its route. It's done for the night. Thank you very much, asshole bus driver. Well, fuck. It's dark, it's late, I can't drive, and my parents can't pick me up. I'm too broke to afford a taxi as well, so all I can do is walk home. I guess the exercise would be good for me. Now, from the shopping center, it would take me a good 20 to 30 minutes to reach my house, and that's if I power walk the entire time. I could probably run home, but fuck that, dude. When you leave the shops, if you follow the road, there's a local Catholic school, a public library, a public school, and a few bus stops along the way. Near the library is a traffic intersection, the most brightly lit area of this entire road, but it's also a very small square. It's a joke, honestly. As I'm walking, it takes me less than a second to realize just how dark it was on that street. It was honestly a bit creepy, walking by this local Catholic school with their massive crucifix in the middle of a huge mass of land. In front of me is a girl who looks about my age, Asian, and she's walking fairly quickly. Understandable. From the very corner of my eye across the road, I can see a man kind of half jogging, half walking. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but it was definitely suspicious. So I decided to keep my eye on him and that girl. At the intersection, one of my friends was there. He greeted me very enthusiastically and gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He momentarily distracted me from that weird running man and the girl as well. Between my friend and I greeting each other, I completely missed when the guy crossed the street and was now in my path. Well, turned out my friend was kind of a douchebag because he just left me after I told him about this weird dude. I was not far from the creep at this point, and the girl. I could see he was now talking to her. If a guy has any common sense, he'll not speak to a girl or woman while she's alone at night. We've all heard the horror stories. By this stage, I'd quickened my pace into a sprint, holding onto my backpack so my laptop inside wouldn't make much noise. I was assessing my very limited options on how to help this poor woman. She was clearly in trouble now. I'm a very small, very unintimidating Asian girl, and the guy looked bigger and bigger the closer I got. I felt so tiny and incredibly stupid for doing this because I was still far away. I have crazy good eyesight though, and the streetlights just happened to be lighting up his face, so I could make it out accurately enough in case I needed to identify him. He was a white male, early 30s to 40s. Brown hair, wearing glasses, striped long-sleeve top, and brown khakis. His eyes were super big, the kind of face you make when someone surprises you with something particularly scandalous. On my way there, I come up with what was probably the most stupidly brilliant plan I've ever concocted. I just kinda stood there, hoodie on, feet apart, hands on my hips, and in my loudest, best impersonation of an older Filipino woman getting mad at her child, I made the strongest accent I could. "Oi, what are you doing? Huh? You were supposed to be at home already, and talking to a boy, huh? And he's white? Excuse me, look at me while I'm talking to you. I did not raise you like this." I don't remember exactly word for word what I said, but I was basically copying whatever my mom says when she's angry with me. The entire time I'm yelling, I can see the guy beginning to inch away. The girl looked so bewildered, like a deer caught in the headlights. At this stage, I was honestly expecting her to run away. I turned to the guy. "And where do you think you're going, huh?" He fucking ran for it. I swear it was like watching a real-time cartoon. The girl was still standing there. I took off my hood and waved to her. I was still very far away at this point, and asked if she was alright in my regular accent. She was just staring at me. I apologized if I'd scared her, but I had to get him away. I remembered a story my younger sister would tell me about this creepy guy that liked to corner young girls in the park not far from where we lived. Anyway, we hugged and exchanged names and numbers, and now we're basically friends forever. It turns out that she didn't live very far away, and didn't even realize what was happening until she could no longer get away from the man. I ended up walking her home, and from there, her older brother dropped me off. We called the police while we walked to her place. When we retold the story to our families, at this stage, I correctly assumed they were Filipino as well. Communication was very easy. They banned us completely from taking the bus past 7. I was reluctant in telling my friends this because I knew they'd laugh, but it was such a serious thing. What if I hadn't been there? As comical as that sounded, she was really shaken up but very relieved and grateful. She kept hugging me and stuff, which is weird. I don't usually hug strangers. Police later stopped a nondescript station wagon about 20 minutes down the main road. It was a man matching my description exactly. They searched his car and found a few photos of girls in the glove compartment, and even more on his phone. They were all Asian, specifically Filipino. Months later, after I found out about this, Mom tells me they actually found photos of my sister and I as well. It made me shudder. Last year, I followed my boyfriend to his summer internship across the country. I didn't have many job prospects myself, given it was a rather economically depressed area. So, after applying to some minimum wage jobs and coming up with nothing but a telecom company, which I found way too depressing an idea to entertain, I got on a caregiving website to find a family I could nanny for. After a bit of searching, I found a family who needed weekday care for their 2 toddler-aged boys. I went to their house to meet them for an interview the following day. The parents, John and Sarah, were an early 30s, nice, easygoing couple, and the two little boys were sweet as well, so I quickly knew we would be a very good fit. During our meeting, they described the boys' schedules, eating habits, my chores, and then they told me about Ben. Ben was an old friend and retired war vet who lived in a side room off the kitchen, away from the other bedrooms. They said he'd fallen on hard times and had been living with them for the last few years, at least while he got back on his feet. They understood that it seemed a bit strange. They went out of their way to explain how John had known him his whole life, and Ben was basically a part of the family at this point, so he could be completely trusted. Alright, I mean, it's still kinda weird, but these people were doing a compassionate thing for their friend, right? I started working for them the next week, and didn't meet Ben until 3 days in, when I was getting ready to leave after Sarah returned home from work around the same time as him. I remember she introduced us, and he kinda just said hi in a very low voice, then averted all eye contact when I said hello back and offered my hand. After very quickly shaking it, he turned his attention to the 1-year-old saying a cursory, "Nice to meet you," which I returned before making my exit while chatting with Sarah. Nothing about the interaction seemed too off to me, except he did seem rather cagey. I just took it though as him being either generally shy or nervous around young women or something. As the summer went on, I didn't really see too much of Ben. He left for work between 8 to 10 a.m. most days, and he'd usually return home for lunch, but I rarely ever saw him, and if I did, all he'd do was offer a nod and return to his quarters immediately. Sometimes I'd see him outside doing some yard work. Only one time he came to get me, as I hadn't left enough room for his car to back out for work. That was probably my longest interaction with him, at least to my knowledge. One day, as the boys napped, I was swiffering the house, and although I wasn't responsible for Ben's room, I knew he wasn't home at the time. I was so curious about how a man like him lived. I cleaned what I could of it as well. Upon entering, I saw a room akin to a college-aged male's space. Most surfaces were covered with trash or clothing, and his bed had no sheets on it, just clothes on one half. On his desk was a 3-monitor computer with the desktop on and the file explorer open, so as a generally nosy person, I was incredibly tempted to click around. My consciousness, though, got the best of me. This was the one time in my life I'm glad I wasn't a snooping bitch. To fast forward a bit, I continued working for their family, without much event, for the rest of the summer. I actually really enjoyed my time with them. Working for them was once a pleasant memory in my mind. That is, until 2 weeks ago when I suddenly got a call from Sarah. I had no clue what she could be calling about, as I had stopped working for them in August and returned to school since. Perhaps it was to catch up? I didn't think it could be anything like this. Sarah's voice trembled and eventually broke as she described to me what had just happened to them. Apparently, a few hours earlier, the FBI had busted into their home, booted them out, ransacked it, and informed them that Ben not only had shitloads of child pornography on his computer, but he'd also installed secret cameras all over their house, which he was using to watch all of us. I was in a state of utter shock and horror upon hearing this. I don't remember how I responded, but she couldn't stop apologizing to me for subjecting me to such a gross violation. Of course I accepted her apology. How the fuck could she have possibly known? She then informed me I was going to be contacted by the authorities to give my statement about any odd experiences I'd had with Ben, and that I could ask them any questions I had about the case. When we hung up, I immediately thought back to how I had almost searched through his computer. I could have very likely discovered his crimes at that time. After that, feeling sick to my stomach, I screamed into a pillow for a while, took a long shower attempting to get his disgusting pedophilic voyeur stink off of me. It didn't really help, and I cried myself to sleep that night, wondering if he'd ever hurt those little boys, and questioning if I could have done more to stop it. A few days later, I was contacted by a Homeland Security agent. I don't really know why both agencies were working on it. He asked me a ton of questions about Ben, and I told him what little information I had. I'd never knowingly experienced any abuse from him, though. He then told me the sheer extent of Ben's crimes. I was relieved that they had no evidence Ben had ever harmed the boys, at least, and his crimes only seemed to revolve around females. But in addition to the hidden cameras, apparently he sometimes upped the ante by creeping around outside the house, taking stealthy pictures of us through the windows. Was he ever really doing yard work? Not only that, during one of the times I'd napped when the boys did, he snuck into the living room where I'd laid on the couch and had an entire photo shoot of me sleeping, consisting of dozens of shots, some right next to my face. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, the sick fuck also had an entire folder dedicated to when I used the bathroom. Sarah, however, he captured naked all the time. Apparently, she was the main focus of this disturbed attention. There's more, but he said that was all that was pertinent to my situation. I opted to not learn any more about it, as I was already way too overwhelmed. Having never been the victim of a serious sex crime before, I'm still figuring out how to handle all of this and move past it. Beyond myself, though, I'm disgusted that such kind, wonderful people were able to be hurt like this by someone they considered a close friend. To be stalked in your own home. I just can't imagine how you'd ever get over that huge violation of trust. It chills me to my very core. It was the fall of 2007, and I was 15 living in New York. I was a competitive athlete in high school, the type who got up before school for workouts and trained for long hours after. With recruiting season a year away, I was under tremendous pressure to perform in my sport, as well as in the classroom. I was struggling to keep up in calculus at the time, so my mom suggested I get a tutor. She made an appointment with a teacher friend of hers who really knew his stuff. I'd been going to him regularly, probably 3 times a week for a month, before I met Alex. Alex had the tutoring session after mine, and we'd crossed paths every week. It had never been more than a glance and a smile, as I was incredibly shy and terrified of boys. He was tall and blonde with piercing blue eyes, so naturally I thought he was very cute. One day, my tutor had to change his schedule and decided to book us together, as we were learning the exact same topics in calc. I was shocked and delighted when Alex started chatting with me afterwards and asked for my phone number. I had never had a boy pay attention to me in that way, and I was flattered that someone cute wanted my number. Eventually, Alex and I began dating. Alex went to Catholic school in another town, but because he lived in the same town as I did, he took the bus every morning from my school to his. This gave us most mornings together, and he was able to meet my friends as well. I was a little bit taken aback when they didn't immediately like him like I did. They mentioned him seeming quite weird, and I got super defensive, but I did let it go in the end. I realized that I'd been spending less time with them than I normally did, and assumed they were jealous I now had a boyfriend. As time went on, things got more serious. We started experimenting sexually, and eventually I lost my virginity to him in the back of his Ford Escape. That's when things began to change. While Alex and I always talked regularly, he started getting way over the top about staying in contact with me. He would make me stay on the phone with him at all hours of the night, until eventually my mom started taking my phone away before I went to sleep. This relationship also started taking a toll on my athletic career. I was too tired to spend my extra time training, and started skipping my practices to see him, driving 30 minutes each way to his school. Eventually my friends sat me down and told me how unhealthy this relationship had become. I had completely isolated myself from them, and all of my free time was spent with him. I realized I wanted so badly to end the relationship. I had fallen out of love with Alex, and college applications were fast approaching. I had been scouted by no less than 10 colleges. My plan was to attend Brown, my dream school. Alex's obsession with our relationship had taken a huge toll on his grades, and Brown was not going to be an option for him. I remember when I told him that was where I was planning on going, he freaked out, saying he would never get in there and begging me not to go. At the time, I was also recruited by the University of Illinois. Alex applied there in hopes I would ditch Brown and go to Illinois with him. That was the final straw for me, though. I ended things for good with Alex, assuming that would be it. Because Alex would take the bus from my school to his every morning, I still had to see him. I remember walking into school past him and his classmates who took the bus with him. Some of his guy friends would call things like slut and whore at me. Apparently, he had spread a rumor I had cheated on him with a bunch of guys and then ended it with him. I tried to ignore it until I started getting Facebook messages from random people around his school. I spent months getting these nasty messages from guys at his school, accusing me of having STDs and telling me I was going to get gang-banged by his friends. Eventually, I had to delete my Facebook because it just would not stop. I think deleting my Facebook was what set off the true stalker tendencies for Alex, though. He was no longer able to see my face online, so he started calling non-stop and sending desperate AIM messages telling me he loved me. While all this was going on, I was the favorite to win the high school championship in my sport. I'd gone undefeated all season. Alex ended up showing while I was competing for the championship, and I saw him there. It shook me so badly I ended up losing the title. I was furious and heartbroken. I picked up his phone call that night and screamed at him, telling him to never contact me again. That's when the threats began. I got a call a few nights later from him. After he texted me, he had something important to tell me. Stupidly, I answered. He began to tell me specifically how he was going to kill me. He was going to show up at my house when my parents were at work with a rope and knife and make me suffer, like I'd done to him. I started to cry. He eventually went on to say he was going to get me before I went into school because he knew exactly where I parked every morning, and my parents would never find my body. At this point, I had the fortuity to decide to record what was being said and taped it on my phone. I hung up once I felt I'd heard enough. The next morning, I went to school extra early, much earlier than I figured he'd possibly be able to be there. I showed my advisor the recording, who then called my mom. I remember feeling a deep-rooted sense of shame as my mom listened to it, like I had done something to bring this on myself. My advisor was so alarmed by the recording, he advised me to go to the police immediately. This day still feels surreal to me. My mom and I sat in the police station all day, explaining the story of my relationship with Alex and how everything got to this point. The police then drove to his high school and arrested him while he was in class. The topper on the day, though, was when I went out to bring food back to the police station for my mom and I. I pulled into the station at the same time as the car holding Alex did. I saw him in cuffs, and I could see in his eyes that he really wanted to kill me. Post-arrest, I got a restraining order against Alex, and he was sent to a mental institution for a while. He ended up breaking the RO on more than one occasion. I contacted the police, but they didn't think it was cause to do anything. I think it's important to note that Alex's family was wealthy and had a big name in the area, so it wouldn't have surprised me if that's why they brushed it under the rug. I ended up attending Brown and had to inform them of the RO and let them know Alex should not be allowed on campus. It's been over 10 years since this all happened, and I still continue to receive friend requests and phone calls from him on occasion. I recently moved across the country from where this occurred. I finally feel safe now that I'm so far from where he lives, but anytime I get a blocked call or a text from a number I don't know, it goes through my head immediately that that must be him. It's safe to say that this experience has completely changed who I let into my life and who I choose to date. So I, 19 and female, was at a house party a couple days ago. I only really knew a couple of the people there, and it was pretty packed as well. I hung around with two of my friends there for a while, having some drinks here and there. After a while, though, my friends went into this room that everyone was hotboxing in. I didn't go in myself because I didn't really feel like drinking and being stoned at a party where I barely knew anyone. Instead, I just mingled around for a bit, then went on my phone talking to my other friends. I noticed though at some point that this guy kept staring me up and down, and instantly felt my stomach sink. I'm no stranger to people trying to catch my eye to strike a conversation or flirt, but I just instantly had a very bad feeling about this guy. I looked back down at my phone and sent my location to my friends, just letting them know where I was. Things were changing from feeling chill to suddenly being very sketchy. There were a bunch of soda cans in the kitchen, so I got up to grab a Sprite instead of having any more drinks. I'd brought my own alcohol with me, and I would never accept any drinks from strangers. As I'm there, the guy that kept looking at me before comes in and started trying to get me to take this drink in a solo red cup from him. Of course, I said, "No, that's alright, I have a Sprite, but thanks though." He kept trying to force it on me, and I was getting pretty annoyed because he was being super pushy. At this point, I was pretty blunt with him. "Look, I don't want your drink or your company. Leave me alone." And I walked away. I thought that'd be the end of it, and pushed it to the back of my mind as one of my friends came out from the hotbox room, all stoned and happy. We hung out some more, and my friend wanted a cigarette, so I went out on the balcony with her. As we're out there, she puts her cigarettes on the ledge, and as she's talking animatedly, her arm accidentally pushed her cigarettes off, and they fell down into the yard. I was gonna go downstairs and outside with her to get them, but she told me she had to grab something from her car anyway, and that she'd be right back. I decided just to wait there for her. I'm on my phone and I hear the door open. I expected it to be her. As I'm about to say that was quick, I spin around, and suddenly I'm face to face with that same guy from earlier. He immediately grabbed my face and kissed me. I pushed at his chest and said, "What the fuck, dude? Did you not hear what I said?" He proceeded to say something in Spanish, which I can't speak, but I could pick up a few words he was saying. I had a friend who was an exchange student, and she taught me all of the naughty words. I told him to fuck right off and went to push past him to go back inside. He proceeded to push me up against the wall and try to kiss my neck. That's when I pushed him away as hard as I could. He let go of my wrists and grabbed my throat hard, while maintaining eye contact and smirking at me the whole time. Just when he used his other hand and grabbed my ass, my friend came back from getting her cigarettes, poked her head out, saw what was happening, and tried to intervene. He shoved her with his other hand. I heard her say, "What the fuck? Oh, hell no." She grabbed the closest guy to the door from inside and brought him out for assistance. The random, heroic guy from inside then grabbed the crazy throat grabber, putting him in some type of hold, and started screaming at him. He got kicked out, and I'm pretty sure people punched him in the face on his way out too. Everyone was super apologetic and said they didn't even know who that guy was, and weren't sure how he'd gotten there in the first place. I wasn't about to call the cops or anything, because, I wasn't gonna get the party busted, but I went to the bathroom and immediately broke down crying. I called my other friends since my friends that were here with me weren't sober enough to drive, and they came to get me. I still have a couple of finger mark bruises on my neck. I'd hate to think about what would have happened had my friend been distracted by something and not come outside when she did. At least I know my intuition works great, but let me say, I'm never again going to a party where I barely know anyone anymore. That was scary as all hell. This story starts on a Thursday night in May 2017. I work in retail, and after a long shift one night, I called an Uber home, so I could avoid the dodgy people that sometimes hang around the train station. I wish I had known, though, that this simple act of calling for transportation would lead to a 6-month-long ordeal of harassment and obsession. I got into the car and chatted with the middle-aged driver, who I'll call T. He had a strong Turkish, accent, and seemed very friendly initially. The conversation was fairly normal at first, with him asking where I worked and why I was out so late, what I was studying. As the conversation progressed, he began to make comments that started to make me feel uncomfortable. He started to comment on how pretty I was and how young I looked. How he missed the times when he was young and could get so many girls like me. He then put his hand on my knee and patted it affectionately and tried to push my hair out of my face. I was aware that he was controlling a moving vehicle, so I just ignored him and prayed that we would get to our destination faster. When he pulled up to our place, he noticed a car was in the driveway and immediately retracted his hand. He asked me if I wanted to go out for coffee sometime. I politely declined, said I had a partner already. He told me that he was a lucky man, and I could call him any time for a free ride. He then reached out and kissed my hand. I felt physically sick, but thanked him for the ride, and got out as fast as possible. As soon as I was inside, I told my boyfriend what happened, who encouraged me to report the driver. I was apprehensive at first because he knew my address already, but eventually I did report it, as I knew we were moving soon. I was reassured by Uber that the matter would be investigated and received a full refund for the trip. I didn't hear anything from T after that, and was soon busy into my study schedule, working and moving house. I had forgotten all about him until around August, where by chance I ran into him in our cafe. I was in line to get a coffee when I got a sudden tap on the shoulder. My heart sank. He gave me this big smile and tried to give me a hug as well, which I declined. "Hey there, I've missed your pretty face. Where have you been?" "I'm super busy, sorry, I can't really talk right now," I sputtered. I ordered my coffee hastily and burst out the door with him hot on my tail. He started walking beside me, matching my pace. I was starting to breathe heavily and hyperventilate. "Hey, so I could have bought you that coffee. We still need to go on that date after all." I told him no, I was not interested, and he was making me uncomfortable. Then he grabbed my hand as we were walking. "What the fuck? What are you doing?" "Oh, is that too soon?" "Too soon? Too soon for what? We're not on a date. I don't even know who you are. Leave me alone." I said this loud enough for people around me to hear me, and a few people had started to pay attention. "Oh, are you a lesbian or something?" "No, what is wrong with you? I'm just not interested in you." I was mortified. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to upset you," he said. He then patted my back. I physically flinched and walked away from him, close to having a mental breakdown. He called out from behind me as I was leaving. "Hey, you still work at that shoe store, right?" I realized then that I had told him where I worked that night, and he had picked me up and seen me in uniform as well. I had also told him where and what I studied. I couldn't believe my own stupidity. I alerted my store manager, who then alerted shopping center security, who assured me that they would be on the lookout. Sure enough, my first shift back after that cafe run-in, my manager told me that someone had come in asking for my phone number and when I was next on shift, claiming to be my boyfriend. My manager refused to give this information and notified security immediately, but by the time they had arrived, he had left already. They showed me the grainy security footage of people coming into our store around that time, and sure enough, it was T. I was told that if he came in again to go hide out in the back and the other girls on shift would deal with him instead. A few months later, he tried to add me on Facebook. I immediately changed my name so I couldn't be identified anymore and blocked him. The most recent incident happened in September last year. I was tidying the window display out the front of the store when I immediately felt like I was being watched. I looked to my left, and sure enough, T was right there. I pretended not to know him. "Can I help you with something, sir?" "Just admiring your beauty," he said with a smile. He then gave me an envelope and walked out before I could say anything else. Inside was a card saying that he'd really felt a connection and thanking me for my help today, even though I never actually got to serve him. It was also a voucher for the local bikini store for $100. I realize now is the time to involve the police, and I'm kicking myself for not contacting them in the first place. I haven't heard from him in a while, so I'm praying that I don't ever again. I'm still wondering though if I should involve the police even though it's been a while since we last made contact, just in case he tries something else. This happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was at a rather large toy store with my dad and sister, who was 2 years older than me, so that I could pick out a birthday present for a friend of mine. My dad and I were looking at the Lego sets they had available, while my sister was just sort of shuffling around, bored out of her mind. At some point during all of this, she wandered away. I was looking at the box of this castle set, sort of wishing that it was my birthday coming up instead, when my sister returned and tugged on my dad's arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked without looking away from the box he was holding. I think he also wished it was his birthday coming up too. "There's a man... Oh, never mind, he's gone now." My dad looked at her, putting the box back on the shelf. "What man?" he asked. "There was a man who asked if I wanted to come see his puppy, and I said I'd have to ask you first, but I don't know where he went." My dad took the box out of his hands and put it back on the shelf, then took my hand in his and put the other hand around my sister's shoulders. "Well then, let's go find him," my dad exclaimed, and began leading us towards the checkouts and exit. Now, like I said, this toy store was rather large and we were walking very fast. As we got near the checkouts, my sister pointed out a man who was just about to leave the store and said, "That's him." I could see how she recognized him from behind. He had very notable long hair. It went more than halfway down his back. I remember him having a black winter coat on as well, which was strange because it was a pretty warm day out. He walked even faster after that, until we were at the nearest checkout. My dad said to us, "Stay here with this nice lady for a second, okay?" Referring to the cashier. He ran up behind the man who was now almost out the door, threw his hand on his shoulder so hard I could hear it all the way from there. My dad spun him around and began yelling in his face. "Where's the puppy, huh? Where's this puppy you wanted to show my daughter?" The people around started looking over at the commotion, and my dad continued. "You wanted to take my daughter to see your puppy, right? So where is it? I want to see this puppy too." The man was stammering and stuttering and trying to get away, but my dad had a very firm grasp on the man's shoulder. Turning his head to where we were standing, my dad yelled to my sister, "This is the guy who asked you to come see his puppy, right?" My sister silently nodded her head and then looked at her shoes. I think she thought she was going to be in trouble. I didn't blame her. Our dad was very angry. "So where is it? In your car? Where's your car then? Is that it over there?" He pointed out the glass door into the parking lot. "Or is that your car? Is that where the puppy you wanted to show my 6-year-old daughter is?" I remember thinking that if he just let go of the guy, he could lead us to the puppy. Before I knew it though, 3 men in yellow jackets rushed in. There was a word on their jackets which I couldn't read at the time, though I knew all of the letters. My dad let go of the man, and the yellow fellows held him instead. My sister was crying at this point. My dad walked back to us, once again taking my hand in one of his own, and putting the other gently around my sister's shoulders. He asked the cashier if she had a phone he could use, and she took us into the office. He called our mom to come pick us up, then assured my sister that she was not in trouble. In fact, she was in the least amount of trouble anyone had ever been in the history of the entire world, simply by coming and asking his permission to see the puppy. I asked him if we were still going to go see it. He just looked at me and said, "Sorry, son. It seems the puppy ran away." Our mom came in just a few minutes, and as we were leaving, there were already police cars showing up. "Are they going to help him find the puppy?" my sister asked my mom, but she said, "No, they're here for something else." The other day, after listening to a lot of stories, I remembered this incident and asked my dad about it. Apparently, when the cops searched the man's car, they found the standard rope, duct tape, a knife, pliers, and a hacksaw. Also, at the guy's apartment, they found a shitload of child porn. My dad and sister testified at his trial, and the guy got 20 years, which means, barring other circumstances, he must be out by now. I also asked my dad if my sister knew about the stuff in his car. He said no, and to keep it that way from now on. I had a very creepy friend at one time. We'll call him Ben. I believe he might be a dangerous psychopath, or at worst, a serial killer. Ben and I met on Facebook in 2014, and he came to meet me in Romania in the summer of 2015. He seemed a little bit odd, but otherwise he was perfectly fine. One strange thing about him is that while he was at my house for a week, he didn't bathe for some odd reason, so he stank to high heaven. So I show him around Transylvania, and we both rent an apartment in Bucharest before his departure. We hang around for a bit, and then he leaves. Our friendship continues online, and in 2016, I moved back to Canada. In May of that year, I fly over to Vancouver to hang out with him. Now, it's important to note that this guy was a major gun nut. He collected a lot of firearms, and claimed to have briefly been in the Canadian military. He also claimed he worked as a mercenary, and was in Georgia during the Russian invasion in 2008. He claimed to have shot 2 people there, and also to suffer from PTSD. I get there, and his apartment is filthy. I'm talking trash everywhere. 2 cats as well that made the place stink of cat piss. The guy kept his lights on 24/7, and on his wall was a clock that played a loud tune every hour. His behavior toward me while there was somewhat disrespectful, but I took it just as a buddy messing around with me. He did say some mildly creepy things, but again, I brushed it off as him just being a prankster. I leave again, and our friendship continues online. During this time, his conversations with me became darker and more hostile, in a passive-aggressive sort of way. Ben was also a hardcore alcoholic who would often drink until he passed out. He did all sorts of antisocial and even downright vile things when he was drunk. Also, during this time, in the 2016 to 2017 period, he said that 2 men had briefly lived with him for a very short time. When I'd press him about what happened to those 2 men that lived with him, though, he changed the subject very quickly. After what happened in 2018 when I last met up with Ben, I have a strong suspicion something very bad might have happened to them. Fast forward to 2018. Me and my parents are driving to Vancouver from Calgary. Perfect time to meet up for a day or 2 with Ben. This was a big mistake, though. We met up at a bar near his house. We had a few drinks, and he went home for the night. The next day, we met up again, and his behavior toward me was a lot more disrespectful in a passive-aggressive way, and extremely creepy, actually. We went to his workplace, and he was very subtly disrespectful to his coworkers as well. He kept putting me on the spot, trying to make me look stupid to everyone around. He was a supervisor, so most of the people underneath him were too complacent or afraid to say anything. The man was obviously a psychopath. This is where it gets to a point where I believe my life was in danger. We go back to his place. He's drinking a beer, I'm rolling a joint. A movie is playing, and Ben is getting very tipsy. He basically adopted a speech pattern in our conversation where I started to feel as though I was being interrogated, and even possibly toyed with. He was playing a video game on his computer while I was watching a movie. By this time, I was feeling very uneasy. My gut instinct was telling me to leave. Generally speaking, you should always try and listen to that. That primal thing inside you linked to fight or flight is best to be obeyed. Now, as the day progressed and Ben was becoming more drunk, he started to say some very weird things. I don't care about anyone but myself. I don't give a shit about people. There was a loaded shotgun beside the table. He looked at his computer screen and started mumbling something about being a madman with a gun. A few minutes later, he turned to me. Hey, what if I put some MDMA in your drink? You know, I'm just kidding, alright? The cat and mouse games continued. He was now talking about knowing a guy who was HIV positive and how he was going to get the guy to give it to him through an infected needle so he could live on government benefits for the rest of his life. This guy was getting unhinged. I was sitting there in disbelief at the vile things he was saying. I wanted to leave, but I also didn't want him to know I was ready to go. It was an awful, vulnerable feeling. He took another beer and turned to me. The talk was now about food. He turned and looked me dead in the eyes and asked, "So, if this was your last meal, what would you like to have?" The look on his face was one of stone-faced sincerity and malice. I knew I had to flee. My heart started pounding. I needed to make a move. With adrenaline rushing through my body, I told Ben in a very calm manner that the weed I had was making me feel very funny and I needed to step out for a breath of fresh air. I quickly slapped on my shoes and left before he had a chance to stop me. He made me promise I would come back, but I leapt down the stairs into the sunlight. I felt like an animal that just escaped a slaughter. The place I'm staying at was not too far from Ben's house. I was wise enough to not tell him that's where I actually was staying, though. I started walking, feeling like I'd just escaped certain death. The phone rings. Ben is desperately asking where I'm at. He's panicking. I tell him I'm still taking a breather. Meanwhile, I go over to my cousin's house. I manage to get inside. By this point, night has fallen. The guy is calling my phone constantly. When I answer him, he's always trying to get me to meet up with him and go for a long ride. The tone of his voice was flat and fake, though. He tells me we just had a bad night. He's desperately trying to get me to go for a ride with him. I blocked his number. I blocked him on social media. That was the last time I spoke to that scumbag. In our many online conversations over the years, Ben would always drop clues here and there about his past, that he had done horrible things during his supposed gig as a mercenary. He would always go on these drunken tirades about being a bad man who did bad things. He was going to AA meetings and trying to put on a facade of normality by volunteering at an old folks' home. Deep down, though, I think he's a sociopath, a potentially dangerous one at that. I just hope he never hurt anyone, other than those 2 people he allegedly shot while on combat duty. Vancouver is a sketchy place full of missing people, though, so I guess we'll never know. I had a stalker from Xbox Live try to find me at work 2 days ago on Monday. I'm only 17 and work second shift at my local movie theater. It was a Friday night and my weekend had just begun. I was on Xbox Live playing some Overwatch and eating now cold pizza like lots of my friends were. I was kicking some considerable ass, more so than I usually do at this game. I was on fire. For non-Overwatch players, it basically means you're doing really, really good. For 3 matches. At around 2 a.m., I decided I was doing well enough to step up my game and head on into competitive mode. I got into a match at King's Row, and I was playing Pharah on defense. I got a 15-player kill streak, but I noticed that 5 of those were on the same guy. Bastion, I think. I still remember his username. The match went on for about another minute when I suddenly got an invite to a party. The gamer tag was the same as the Bastion I'd just killed for the 6th time. I wasn't in a party yet since all of my friends had called it a night except for me at that point. I decided that whatever he wanted to say to me could be interesting. So I added him. Now, I usually expect some kids a few years younger than me to be shit-talking me or something, but to my surprise, it was a grown-ass man on the other end. More to my surprise, he sounded in his 30s rather than closer to my age, and he had a very thick Spanish accent as well. Immediately, the guy started cussing me out. I can't lie when I say I half expected this to happen when I'd first gotten the invite. I had the mentality where if you're a jerk to me, I'll return the favor in kind. I replied to his rants with the classic, "Oh, you mad, bro?" The guy didn't acknowledge me at all. Instead of saying some stuff like how he would fuck my mom or something like most people did, this guy said, "Fuck you, your entire damn family. I'm gonna decapitate your mother and make your dad fuck her down her neck hole." I was sort of shocked by this at first, but it didn't really last. "Bro, why don't you just take a chill pill or something?" "No, I want you to..." He stopped. I noticed why. A DVA on our team had just killed his hero again. Now this is where things got scary. It sounded as if he'd transformed into a rabid animal that was trying to suffocate itself on the mic, and screaming, growling, and spitting all at the same time. It's hard to describe exactly what sound he was making, but it was pretty inhuman. It was like this person was being gutted and possessed by a horrible demon at the same time. This was a grown man too, which made the entire thing scary, compared to how I'd be laughing my ass off if a 12-year-old lost it like that. The match ended. The enemy team didn't even get the payload moving. The man lost his shit because he lost. I decided to be a bit of an asshole again and not take this clearly crazy guy's shit. "Look, man, it's not anyone else's fault you suck at this game. You're just being treated like the child you really are, so why don't you grow up, man?" The Spanish guy really didn't like this. He just hollered, "Fuck you," into the microphone for, no joke, 20 seconds. It started getting all crackly. He was being so loud that he was actually busting his mic. He then removed me from the party. I decided that since the match was over, I'd call it a night, just like my friends had. My overall reaction was something along the lines of, "Oh, well, that just happened." I logged out, turned off my Xbox, and headed off to bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I realized how much of a dumbass I was for not recording any of this. My friends would have lost it when they heard it. Then I fell asleep. Saturday went by with nothing happening, and I thought that was that with this pissed-off Spanish guy. Sunday was after Saturday, and I logged onto my Xbox that morning to play some more on my day off. I noticed I had a message from that same guy. "Good morning," my full name. "I know you have to go to the address of the movie theater I work at tomorrow." What the fuck?" I said out loud. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the TV screen. I then texted my boss about it and told her some random guy on Xbox somehow found out where I worked. Well, my boss was a bitchy old lady, so naturally she didn't really care much about what happened on Xbox. Even though it did directly concern my work, she just blew it off and told me I still had to come in the next day. After all, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and The Incredibles 2 were so hot, so we were going to be very busy. I ended up coming in the next day at 5:30. It was pretty boring and very busy like I predicted, until about 8 o'clock, when this super short guy came stumbling in through the door. It was pretty loud and crowded, but the guy fucking hollered my full name. Same thick Spanish accent from Xbox. Oh fuck, this guy is him. I still to this day don't know where he got all my info from, or why he decided to come all the way out to where I worked. It was just a game. The theater fell silent immediately. I just walked to the back room where my boss was, and told her the guy from Xbox was now inside. She repeated in person the whole "I don't care what happens to you on Xbox, get back to work, we're busy" rant that she had texted me. I repeated to her that the guy was inside the building. I didn't know if he wanted to hurt me or not, and I was going to call the cops. I actually did end up calling them. It wasn't until they arrived and spoke to me privately in the back room that my boss ended up taking me seriously. The Spanish guy was still waiting in the lobby. The cops put him in cuffs and walked him out. This is according to my boss. I was still in the back room, so I couldn't witness it. I still haven't heard anything back from the cops yet, and I don't know how he found my info or why he chose to come all the way to where I worked. I also don't know what he planned to do to me. Either way, I'm still shaken up over it. I don't know if he knows my home address or not either, so I'm pretty much on guard 24/7. Either way, I own 2 dogs that can scare off pretty much anyone, but I'm still terrified of this guy. Throwaway, because this is something from my past I'm not particularly proud of. Also, this is pretty long, but it all comes together in the end, I promise. From the ages of 11 to about 16 or 17, I used to be addicted to playing MMORPGs. They were literally my life, and I considered my online friends very real, and I loved them too. Except that I lied to them practically the entire time. You see, at the time I liked to pretend to be a girl. Not for the fun of it, but to target single teenage boys online for in-game currencies, gear, and whatever helped me progress through the game. Anyone who was an avid MMO gamer knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, those amazing outfits you have to buy for real money. Those materials you just had to get with real money to progress through the game comfortably and be able to go against the best of the best. I was addicted, so I wanted all of it. Except I couldn't get it. I couldn't buy it myself. My parents wouldn't agree, and I wasn't able to get a part-time job at that age. So I devised a plan around the ages of 13 or 14 that I would pretend to be a teenage girl and get into seemingly realistic online relationships with teenage boys and coax them into sending me things. I used the names and pictures of teen girls I found on the internet, on places like Flickr or PhotoBucket. Usually, when the boy decides to go snoop because he thinks I'm lying, he would find them and start believing it was really me. These type of people were already too desperate. I even voice chatted with them. My voice was very high-pitched even as a boy going through puberty, so it was like the perfect formula to trick them into liking and gifting me. You have to understand I was desperate for all these things and I wasn't thinking straight because of my addiction. I never realized how much other people could get affected by this. On my first MMO, I tricked a boy into sending me an outfit by pretending to be his girlfriend. This boy seemed madly in love with me, and since this was my first time trying this out, I genuinely felt bad for him and wanted to tell him I'd lied to him. He was pretty similar to me in all aspects, actually. He wasn't well off either, he couldn't work, he had a bad home life, but my idiotic self decided it would be okay for him to gift me. I mean, what can it hurt, right? I thought. This huge identity scam I created escalated from there. I tricked so many other people. Teens, possibly even grown-ass men pretending to be teens. It was horrible. I hated myself the whole time, but I couldn't stop. I needed all these gifts in these games. And that's around where this story starts. When I was 16, the last guy I ever talked to like this was a 23-year-old Russian guy who we'll call Mark. I met him on a very popular shooting MMO. We hung out all the time and had many friends on that game. We voice chatted in a group of people multiple times on Skype while playing. I never once decided to scam him because he was a free player, meaning he never spent money on anything anyway. He also seemed like a genuinely nice dude. But when he asked me out, I tried to take on what I considered the biggest challenge in this scam. Would I be good enough to get a free player to spend on a game for me? Because I was so well liked online and many people knew who I was, and generally I was a very nice girl, my ego was soaring. I knew I could do it. I accepted to date him online, despite him knowing a 16-year-old girl as a 23-year-old man. In the beginning, he was pretty normal. He was always trying to be very sweet and romantic. We did things together all the time. He did all the lovey-dovey hugs and kisses texts, and we even had cyber sex as well. I, being the piece of shit I used to be, played along. It was all going well. Too well. However, I noticed after a week or two that something was not right with him. He seemed to be getting very possessive. He seemed very manipulative. He always talked shit about my other friends behind their backs to make me unfriend them. He would always tell me they talked shit about me too, call them sluts, skanks, whores, and many other terrible names. He would even send proof, which I later found out was photoshopped, from in-game text chats, which disappear so you can't ask said friend to send proof they didn't say what they said. He absolutely despised any guy I ever talked to when we were playing a public match together. I stupidly went along with this. I didn't want him to not trust me, so I could get what I wanted. Then the perfect moment came for me to set him up to send me some gifts. I had to do it. This new outfit the game introduced was too awesome to pass up. I started off by telling him the new game update was pretty cool, and we talked about it for a while. He suggested we both get the new outfit, but I told him I had no money, and I totally would buy it for both of us if I could. He suggested that he stole money from his mother, a single hard-working woman taking care of 2 kids. For a second, my mind almost told me that this was okay, but then I immediately snapped out of it. That was horrible. I couldn't let it go that far. I couldn't believe what I was doing. Was I really about to tell this guy to go steal money from his mother who was struggling to pay bills? That was too far. I decided to log off immediately and shut off the laptop to rethink what my life was becoming. How many of these guys weren't in well-off families, but were probably using or stealing their parents' money like that? I had never thought about it before, but hearing it so directly, I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. The next day, I logged back into Skype at night and was immediately slammed with walls and walls of text from Mark asking me where I went, why I wasn't answering, how I'm such a slut that went to talk to some other guy I know. Many similar things you'd hear from nice guys to girls that give them a chance to flake on them for being weird. I was sick to my stomach. I hated myself, and I hated Mark too. I tried to play it off and say my electricity cut off the entire day. But he didn't believe it. He refused to believe it. I immediately told him I wanted to break things off. But then things took a turn for the worse. He voice called me and I picked it up. He was hysterically crying, shouting at me. I tried to remain calm and told him I didn't want to play games anymore. I told him I was getting more depressed than I already was and felt my addiction to games wasn't helping me. I should go out and see the real world more. He started screaming at me, calling me all kinds of names, this 23-year-old Russian man, threatening what he perceived to be a 16-year-old girl. Everything he said started to get worse, talking about how I ruined his life, how he'd commit suicide if I ever left him, which I thought could possibly happen because he was a cutter already. I started crying and begged him not to. We got into a very heated argument and I could hear him throwing things around and smashing things. I was still crying when I told him I had to go because my parents wanted me to do something. He told me not to, or he would kill himself right then and there. He turned on his camera and pointed a razor to his wrist. I saw all the old cuts on his arm. I was in fear. He couldn't see me, but I was stuck there watching this man threatening to kill himself live on cam, all because of me. All because I decided to trick him into buying me some in-game gifts. Because of this fake identity and fake relationship, I threw up in the garbage bin in my room. I screamed that I had to go, shut off Skype and close my laptop. I sobbed in my room the entire day, realizing karma finally got me, and this is what I deserved for scamming people. I was a mess, and suddenly I passed out asleep on my bed. I don't know how or when it happened, but it did. The next day, I was unusually calm. The day went by pretty normally. I sat there in front of my laptop staring, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I tried to think of what I'd done, and what I had to do now to fix all of this. I didn't want someone to kill themselves because of me, but there was no rational solution. I just had to say goodbye to him and block him, and whatever happened would happen. I opened Skype and was immediately slammed by walls of texts again. This time I didn't read them, but I saw he'd sent some photos as well. pictures of his arms bleeding from cuts he'd made last night after ditching him, pics of him crying. I was immediately sick again, but took a deep breath and went in as calm as I possibly could. When he came online, I told him I was breaking up with him for sure. He again told me he was going to kill himself if I ever dared to leave him. Calmly, I told him if he was going to, then why didn't he? He didn't answer, clearly shocked by the question. He tried to threaten me this time. I told him I didn't care now. He could just find another girlfriend. He didn't need me. He still continued to threaten me. I was getting fed up. I tried to reason with him, even if I was on the verge of revealing I was actually a 16-year-old boy all along. But I decided with this guy it might not be the best thing to do. Regretfully, I told him to go kill himself so no other woman had to go through what he did to me, and then blocked him and deleted him. I deleted my Skype as well and never logged back in. I did see him around a few times on different games I played. He'd try to contact me every time, but I ignored him. He deleted me off his friends list in these games, and we never chatted again. After that, I stopped pretending to be a girl, and told all my friends I was a boy all along. I apologized so profusely. The girls felt betrayed because they really trusted me. Most of the boys who I let on felt betrayed because they liked me, but none of them really made a big deal out of it in the end. I realized how much of an asshole I was for even coming up with this plan, but I decided that I wasn't as much of an asshole as the 23-year-old man who threatened to kill himself live on cam in front of a 16-year-old girl for trying to break off a pedophilic abusive relationship.